with our guest, Allison Lawrence, who's the president of Black Decker, and Dr. Mark Maybury, who's the Chief Technology Officer of Stanley Black Decker. Really excited to hear your stories today around inclusion and innovation and how those two themes are linked and the work that you've been able to do. So Mark and Allison, thank you so much for spending some time with us today, and I will pass it over to you. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Glenn. First of all, it's a real pleasure and honor to be speaking to all of you who are committed to conscious capitalism. Allison and I are going to tag team this. We're good partners and friends, and so we'll go swiftly through our slides because I think the Q&A really is what we're interested in. We know what we're doing, but we don't know what your perceptions are and the like. As you can see here, the company is a global company, 56,000 people around the world, just under $16 billion in revenue, three principal functions, tools and outdoor and industrial segment. And we do actually, in our products, we have a lot of consciously capitalistic products that try to anticipate falls to prevent them, products that are eco-smart, that attempt to lighten vehicles. 9 out of 10 vehicles on the road that are light vehicles or light trucks are Stanley Black Decker held together by robotically inserted fasteners that we create. And there are lots of other examples. Go to the next slide. You can see performance, innovation, and social responsibility at the upper right-hand side. Those are our primary objectives. We want to be top financial quartile. We want to be known as an innovative company, and we want to be socially responsible. And Jim, which to allude to Allison came from the business, was I would say discovered, although frankly she was already a very successful leader in our business. But Jim discovered her one day and said, "Where's she been hiding?" And brought her up to be his chief of staff. And now, of course, she has graduated to the president of Black Decker, one of our premier brands. And so all of us, under Jim's leadership with Allison's stewardship, all of us have in the company have been focused since Jim took over the reins back, I want to say maybe in 2016, just before I came to the company. We've been focused on these persistent, purpose-oriented outcomes. And we do have a purpose for those who make the world. Shannon LaPierre, our CMO, actually led that effort and looked at the history of the company. And ESG, which is a part of consciousness, being responsible for the current and the future world that we are frankly dependent upon. I mean, we would not be here if we didn't have Mother Nature. Really, our ESG strategy is embedded in not only being environmentally responsible, but also being socially responsible. And Allison can speak much more in detail to that as we go through. But as you can see, we're people-focused, empowering makers. We're product-focused, innovating with purpose, and then, of course, planet-conscious in what we do. And we've done a whole bunch of exciting innovation things that we can get to maybe later. So ESG strategy is rooted and is foundational. And we also believe in diversity, and diversity runs deep. It is a core principle of the way we operate. So you can see in our innovation, we do things in a very innovative way. Sometimes we have the plants, like I was this morning at one of our plants, watching one of the operators and our frontline engineers, literally because of choices we made, democratizing the technology, putting it in the hands of those that could shape it and mold it. We also invest in others via Stanley X. We accelerate external companies via Techstars, actually an exciting joint partnership with Techstars, but also with Upsurge, which is an organization in the Baltimore area that specifically targets underprivileged communities and brings them into the innovation ecosystem. So we do a lot of things in a diverse way. And as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, echoing something that Glenn just shared, is that more diverse, more socially responsible companies actually grow better and they're more sustainable. And the data shows that. I'm a mathematician. I'm like, show me the numbers. And the numbers are pretty compelling. So innovation is obviously an important element in addition to being ESG focused. And I guess we'll just share a little video to bring you into the experience of innovation at the company.
Stanley Black Decker's extreme innovation culture fosters innovation of everything by everyone, everywhere. Our diverse innovation ecosystem encompasses core innovation, breakthrough innovation, and open innovation. We accelerate purpose-driven innovation in our centers of excellence and with global partners through Stanley Ventures, Stanley Techstars, and Stanley X. Our ever-evolving extreme innovation culture democratizes innovation and upskills the innovators of tomorrow because we are for those who make the world.
I'd like to turn it over to Allison, who, again, I've already introduced because of our joint history, but a real privilege because she's been a real shining star and a very powerful voice. And just let me say one thing, because she's probably, I don't want to call her shy because she's not shy, but she's too humble to mention it. But she is actually one of the 3 women that have been put in charge by our CEO and our board of our largest and most important businesses within the company: tools, storage, and Black & Decker, all run by women, or in some cases women who are minorities. So that's an exciting sort of prospect. A business, by the way, overall that's run by a minority, I'll note as well. So over to you, Allison.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Glenn and team, for having us. We're so glad to be here to share a little bit about our company and how we operate in the world to be better corporate citizens every day. Mark talked a little bit about our innovation, our composition as an organization, and we're really proud of our financial performance, but just as proud of our cultural foundation as well. And if you look at the screen, you'll see some of the elements that make up who we are. So Glenn talked about up front the higher purpose. We are all in on our purpose as our North Star at Stanley Black & Decker, for those who make the world, as Mark mentioned. And as Jim and the team excavated the purpose when he stepped in, Jim Lurie, our CEO, in 2016, even the intentionality in the word those, being all inclusive, everyone, the makers, the mothers, the shapers, the scientists, no discrimination, and for those who make the world. And that's what we're all in on as well. We have a vision to perform well every quarter as a business, be one of the world's greatest innovators, you'll see there in the middle. And we're going to do that all while elevating our commitment to corporate social responsibility, which really frames who we are and how we move through the world as an organization. Our values and our principles come together to really shape what we are striving our leaders to represent at Stanley Black & Decker. And again, I would say it's modeled extremely well by our CEO and his executive committee and trickles down within the organization. Our operating model was actually a just-in-time refresh of an age-old model at Stanley Black & Decker. It was launched within the organization at the top of 2020, just before the pandemic hit, and was really just in time, focused on performance resiliency, extraordinary customer experience, as you'll see down there, operations excellence, and one that Mark chairs himself at the organization, extreme innovation, democratizing who innovates, where they innovate, how they innovate, to really make it pervasive within our organization. And then this last block just really talks about our corporate responsibility focus, which you saw up front that he mentioned. All of these things we believe work together to modernize a 179-year-old company who started with certainly traditional views and processes and mediums, and really has moved to be updated to be a company that is representative of doing good in the community in the 2020s. You'll see how it all works together. The vision, the what, the who, the why, the how. I won't belabor this, but I want to point to the fact that we have people and technology at the center. We were very, very deliberate about putting people at the center, because no matter what we have going on in the outside, we want to make sure that we're inspiring, motivating, and developing our people day in and day out, and making the world really a better place. We have a mantra that we talk about at Stanley Black & Decker that says, being a force for good in the world. And that is our hope, centered on our people. And we did not want to forsake technology, which ties in this innovation piece that we heard about up front. We know that technology is the future, and the future is here. And so how do we make sure that we're constantly working with those two in tandem to grow our people, develop them, and use the late-breaking technology, both in our innovation internally, and then, as you saw Mark mention, externally as well in our ecosystem. This positions us, as I mentioned before, to be successful as a company, to be successful as community stewards in the 2020s. This just shows, as we move to the next slide, how serious we are about diversity, equity, and inclusion. This DE&I is a part of our DNA at Stanley Black & Decker. We stand for human equality. We condemn anything that promotes inequality. And one of the ways that we mobilize inside the company and even inside the community is through our employee resource groups. It is a global network with more than 90 chapters and represents affinities all the way from Pride and Allies to Asian heritage to veterans to abilities. Mark is actually a co-sponsor and an ally for multiple ERGs within this network, as I am as well. And it allows our employees a place to get connected, to serve in their communities, to unite. And even if you are not a part of that affinity in terms of an ERG, we highly recommend that folks get involved and become advocates and allies, which we think is just as important. At the top of 2020, as we stopped and were stilled as a world and contemplated the state of racial inequities across this globe and here in the US, we wanted to take action. Our CEO, Jim Lurie, does not stand idly by when he sees injustice. And so, as many companies did, we took a hard look at what we could do to activate inside the community. And we came up with this 10-point action plan. It involves culture, career, and community. You can see things like training and development around DE&I inside of our own organization. We have a racial equity library that serves as a resource for our employees to go and learn more about how they can combat bias and how they hire, develop, and recruit their people. We took a step into looking at career equity among our leaders of color. How do we launch programs that help move leaders of color at Stanley Black & Decker through the continuum at an equitable pace? We developed relationships and set up scholarships with HBCUs here in the US so that we can focus on helping close the academic gaps that sometimes exist in communities of color. We'll talk about a program that we launched a little later called RISE. From a community standpoint, because it's not just about our people internally and what we can do, we wanted to look externally as well. We came up with a community-based program to drive equity and inclusion in some of our less resourced communities in Hartford, Connecticut, where we have our world headquarters, looked at diversifying spend with our suppliers, and also said we're committing dollars behind this work. So where can we give to nonprofits and organizations that are moving this cause forward? So we are measuring this, we are tracking this, we are holding ourselves accountable to this 10-point action plan, and we've made significant progress on this S portion of ESG. We talk about racial equity, but just as important to us at Stanley Black & Decker is gender parity. We certainly are focused on bringing gender parity to this world a lot quicker than the unfortunate numbers say that it's going to happen. We are committed to achieving 50-50 gender parity among our SBD leadership by 2030. So what does this look like in our organization? Being conscious and deliberate about how we're promoting women leaders to the organization, providing mentorship programs, sponsorship programs, working with our external partners to bring resources to develop and elevate the leaders that are women across our organization. And again, not just talking about this plan, we have metrics in place. We now have data that we're looking at regularly inside each of our businesses. We're going to move to a place where we're actually compensating according to folks achieving their gender parity goals. So just as committed to making sure that we are moving towards an equal world for women as well at Stanley Black & Decker. And then one program that I wanted to highlight on the next page is, you saw that community pillar that we talked about in terms of our 10-point action plan. Something that Mark and I were a huge part of last year was the RISE community program. So our CEO, Jim Lurie, had a vision that Stanley Black Decker would plug into one of the more economically challenged communities in our world headquarters area, which was the Hartford area, and give young people a chance to bridge the digital divide. We provided iPads and hotspots and resources to middle schoolers and high schoolers, and exposed them to 12 months of programming around STEM and Stanley Black Decker, really giving them a peek behind the curtain at what we do as a Fortune 500 company, providing mentorship, and giving them a glimpse at what they all could achieve as leaders in the community in the future. And so really leaning in, considering those stakeholders that Glenn talked about across the community to include those that we serve. And we are continuing that class again this year in 2022 and expanding it beyond Connecticut to Maryland with the hope that we continue to expand with a larger impact.
Thank you, Allison. And you know, I got to say that it is really genuinely a pleasure to work with leaders like Allison and all of our colleagues, because we're so much more enriched by their perspective. We all have different journeys, and you know, you never quite know what experience individuals have behind them. Maybe they've got an autistic kid at home, or maybe they've got some special skill that you didn't appreciate. And these ERGs are really important for community development. And frankly, the programs like RISE, programs like Connecting to Upsurge in Baltimore are really empowering, you know, or the privilege I had this morning of sitting with a line worker, right? He's 55 years old, you know, basically the same age as me, and his kids are going through all the same things, you know, but he's a Black man innovating on the front line, right? And appreciating his perspective and what his experience, his journey is a real gift. And it enriches us. It I think motivates us to do more, to as we're saying here, you know, in this Empower Makers Impact Challenge was really a wonderful, and this is, you know, as Allison and I have been experienced, so we work for a boss who's a philanthropic at heart, but he's a conscious capitalist, right? He's a man who realizes if he invests in technology, invests in people, he will actually grow the business and he will grow wealth for others. But at the same time, be intentional about the leaders he puts in place, about the programs he invests in. And this is one example of it. It's a wonderful example of a $25 million commitment. We just gave our first $3 million away a couple months ago to principally nonprofits, organizations like maker spaces and skills trade schools and organizations that are developing talent pipelines. And so why do we do this? We do this because there are millions of jobs, something like $2.3 trillion at risk across the globe, because we don't have enough skilled workers, because people aren't being trained in vocational trades. And ironically, I literally had a mother yesterday at a meeting. We were fortunate to meet with the governor of Connecticut and show him some of our latest capabilities. And one of the mothers said, I have two children, one who went to trade school, one who went to university. And guess what? They're both earning the same amount, except there's one difference. The kid who went to university's got debt. This is a mother who said, I wish I knew beforehand. And, you know, so that doesn't mean everybody ought to be going to trade school, but what it means is that we have this massive skills gap. And it just doesn't mean, this is again, consciously capitalistic. We know if we invest in these individuals, upskill them, bring them to a higher level of performance, they will actually generate more wealth. They will also get paid more. And so just like the line worker I met today, he's more productive. You can learn more about the Makers Impact Challenge, which I'm really excited about, because it is going to elevate a bunch of folks. We'll talk about some of the progress we've made. And what you can see here is you know, it's one thing for us to say, you know, you got to do this, you got to do that. It's another thing when, you know, an independent organization assesses us. One of our colleagues, Deb Geyer, just worked to release our first ESG report. It's available on the web. You can read about it if you want to know how much progress we're making towards limiting waste to landfill, reducing our CO2 footprint, et cetera. You can, read about it and actually see the data. And, why are we doing this? We're doing this because we're hearing other conscious capitalists, our investors, are increasingly asking about this. By the way, other stakeholders, like our employees, care about this. We have 3 children, and blessed with 3 children, and the 2 that are in the marketplace right now have, interestingly, intentionally picked the companies they've worked for because of the purpose of the companies and because of the ethics of the companies. I find that fascinating. That this next generation is actually doing that intention. So we want to be an employer that working women and mothers want to go make their careers. We want individuals who maybe are in LGBTQ communities who can't bring their full selves to work. We want them to be we want to create, psychological safety, physical safety, right? And importantly, career opportunity for those folks. Interestingly, line workers, we just participated in a study with Harvard Business School. They studied 1,000 line workers and 1,000 managers and leaders. And what they found was that frontline workers in general were not being paid a wage that they could live on. They found that the turnover rate was very high, 25% or more, even in some of the best companies. And when they were asked what they wanted, what would make you stay? What would make me stay in this career, in this company? It was actually quite simple. Train me, mentor me, and give me career advancement opportunity. That's all I want. I mean, those are things any of us would want. And yet companies in general are failing our frontline workers. And so, we don't want to be one of those companies. We will not be one of those companies. We want to be the example, that shows the way. And we're picking our partners very intentionally, whether it be suppliers that have more sustainable materials, or companies like Ready Robotics or Tulip, some of the companies we are working with that focus on empowerment of people, not artificial intelligence that I got my doctorate in, but augmented intelligence where the machines make, the recognition we like, but what we care more about is that there's genuine value, genuine safety, genuine opportunity in the marketplace. And, that's consistent with our purpose. You can see Jim here in his own words, talking about the passion that those working for those who make the world fills throughout our company. The fact that it results in more satisfaction, results in people not being embarrassed by what their companies are doing, but frankly being inspired that the company gave $1 million to Ukraine, that the company is giving tools to Ukraine, that is providing service to help people in their time of need. Of course, protecting their employees, but also, as Allison was saying, just as important in what you do as what you don't do, right? So divesting businesses in Russia, well before it was something that was encouraged or public. We just did it because it was the right thing to do. And we did it, importantly, quickly and agilely. I think we're getting close to the end. Allison, do you want to take us out in terms of?
I think that's our last slide. The one thing I would add to Mark's great comments for that last page is it really does matter that you have full buy-in at the highest level of the organization, and that has made a difference. You get that question often. What is the difference maker in truly driving a robust ESG agenda and making progress and measuring progress? And I would just say, and I know Mark would echo it with great confidence, that our CEO, Jim Lurie, absolutely believes in this. Conscious capitalism absolutely believes in making the best decisions for all stakeholders involved, absolutely believes in this deep purpose driving the organization and steering the ship, and is a great example to our organization and to leaders throughout the organization of what it looks like to not compromise performing with excellence from a business standpoint and elevating your commitment to social responsibility at the same time. So thank you all for listening, and we're happy to have some questions, some Q&A now.
Yes, thank you so much. Now, this might sound very, basic, but the global Fortune 500 company, is this, you appear on a list? Do you guys talk to each other, go to conferences together? Like, how close is the relationship as a cohort among global Fortune 500 companies?
It's a great question. I'll just jump in, and maybe Allison can augment with her perspective. We participate in a number of forums that bring us into, I would even say third parties that bring us directly. And of course, we have direct peer-to-peer engagements. I know the SVP of innovation at many of our Fortune 100 companies. So with Google or Amazon, or tech companies, if you will, or there'd be industrials like 3M and BASF. I work directly with those, with John at 3M, Peter at BASF. I mean, these are people who, our boss expects us to be engaged with. Just like Deb Geyer, I'm sure, could rattle off a bunch of ESG related companies. I can tell you, I personally have worked with Eastman, which is a supplier of green resin we've introduced the very first green tools that they basically reuse plastic bottles, or convert plastic bottles into in hand tools, like drills and reciprocating saws and sanders and so on. And we've actually, this is really Allison's, I shouldn't be speaking because this is Allison's thunder, but Allison's business is going to remove, I think it's well, she could correct me, I think it's 2 or 3 million bottles by 2022, and then by 25 I think it's 10 million.
10,
right?
At the max.
Impressive. So leaders like Allison are committed to a green future. And they put their money where their mouth is. They're like, okay, we're going to introduce a line of products. We're going to change our suppliers so it's a appropriate supplier, and we do that via these partnerships. So yes, we participate in the World Economic Forum. I just released via the WEF 2 days ago a white paper on augmented workforce with the president of an MIT spinoff called Tula. Why did we do that? We did that, and why do we have an augmented workforce? Because we want to figure out how we can introduce new technologies. We have a really cool technology called DeepHow, which uses AI vision, machine translation, and automated transcription to film. Let's say a worker setting up their workstation or maintaining it, or somebody who's even operating a whole line, and we film and we automatically index and then pump out to the world all those capabilities. Well, that allows us to upskill our workers in a uniform way across the world. And so that's an example of a technology we got through a partnership with Techstars and Siemens, and we now market it. We actually sell it as to small to medium enterprises, because we want to lift up all boats, right? We want our suppliers to be resilient and more profitable, because that in turn makes them to hire better workers, train, be more resilient for our growth needs. Because in the end, we're limited not by demand, right? People love our products, right? They just want more of them. We're limited by workers, the efficient production, and of course resilient suppliers. And so that requires partnership with those other Fortune 500s. And Allison, I don't know if anything else you'd mention about.
The only thing I would add, Eleanor, it's a great question, is we're talking in other organized spaces and convening as a Fortune 500 companies in places like the Business Roundtable, right? Where we're focused on a lot of ESG topics, you name it, and publishing papers around it with CEO signatures and buy-in, right? And we're Mark mentioned WEF, where a lot of these topics are surfaced, or for our company, the National Association of Manufacturers. So we're convening regularly with peers at the highest level to say, how can we collectively put our power behind this portion of ESG and move it forward, whether it's people-centered, environment-centered, you name it. And so you're right, there's some organic relationships that are happening in there, and to Mark's point, a lot of formal structures where we're putting our heads together and just trying to land on how to move some of this forward in a more organized way, linked arms.
Yeah, Allison reminds me, yesterday we happened to host the government's workforce council and the governor himself showed up. And interestingly, really great work by the Connecticut governor, but a lot of, unfilled needs. And, we were talking about, during the healthcare crisis, how Connecticut, set up a daycare next to hospitals. Why? Well, nurses, there's a nurse shortage, and nurses oftentimes are mothers, right? There are male nurses, but there's a lot of female nurses. And guess what? In both male and female, I take care of my grandkids a lot of time, right? Health daycare is really important if in terms of empowering the workforce. Well, the public-private partnerships are also an important form for us to work with some of those other large companies. In Connecticut, it's the Pratt and Whitney's, it's the Raytheon United Technologies, it's the Otis Elevators. We have connections with all of those folks and more because they have the same challenges we have.
Thanks. Been curious about that for a while, and this was a good forum to ask it. So again, to both of you, maybe first to Allison, how about culture driving your operating model? If you really boil the culture down into, a couple of words, what do you think those are as far as incorporating the philosophies of conscious capitalism? Just how does that culture piece work as an operating system?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I would offer up that even now in the 2020s and in this era in history, folks will not engage in business without a strong culture. And so we have work to do. We're 179 years old. I've been with the company 19 years this year. I've seen it evolve. I've seen it change. But I say often, I love who we're becoming. We have moved from kind of a static, unilateral thinking, not necessarily human-centered in the way that we are today, diverse company, into one that is agile and resilient and completely inclusive, right? Come as you are, bring your authentic self to work, collaborative. We think contemporary for a company inside of our space. Human-centered is huge, in terms of how we try to engage and remember that our employee is that person at the core that we care for. So all of our decisions are made with people at the center, as you saw in our operating model. And another I would add, Eleanor, is digitally savvy, if you will, digitally forward, right? We've got to be tech proficient, and Mark's Office of Technology helps us think about those breakthrough technologies, those partnerships we need to close gaps. And so, you are spot on that culture matters. You are spot on. I would say that it matters even more than before. And a couple of descriptors I think of ours are those that I mentioned. And we're encouraging folks to be culture captains where they live and where they play. So, everyone is an ambassador. Everyone is responsible, whether you lead people or not, to be a part of moving that positive culture forward. So Mark, you can add to that. Those are the couple words that come to mind for me: agile, resilient, collaborative, people-centered, inclusive, and digitally proficient.
No, I think those are beautiful, well articulated, Allison. We do have a set of official values, where we talk about, we're sort of committed to being bold and agile, yet thoughtful and disciplined. So we talk about things like courage and innovation. Some of the things Allison was talking about. And we even have a quote: "We're bold to break the mold." We talk about agility and performance, and again, consistent with us being a tool company, we cut through challenges. Similarly, in terms of inclusion and collaboration, like Allison talked about, we join forces for sustainability. And then finally, integrity and accountability. We're reliable to the core. So I think, the kind of cultural aspects that Allison articulated, the core values. I'll say one final thing about those. This was shared with me by one of my personal mentors, who's the former CEO of Campbell Soup, Doug Conant. He runs an institute for higher ambition leaders, and basically conscious capitalism. I mean, he's very, very similar, in purpose, if you will. And he made the comment that when times are really tough, you need to be a values-based leader. Namely, there are no answers, right? It's kind of easy. If someone comes to me and says, "Mark, why don't you create a startup?" Some people say, "Oh my God, that's got to be really hard," so and so. And you're like, not really. Go out and talk to people, You do a little bit of test and evaluation, you pilot things, you get a minimal viable product, then you try to figure out how you can scale it, and then you make sure you got the right margin and go to market, boom, and then you're successful. Well, I just described the recipe, right? We know how to do that. When Allison and I and our colleagues and all of us hit the pandemic, it was like, well, what do we do now? Oh, and even worse, what's next, right? So it's fear, uncertainty, what Jim calls VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, and mass confusion, ambiguity, complexity, right? And so we just as Allison nicely articulated and our values represent, having a rock foundation of that helps you make decisions because there is no playbook.
And I would add, as Mark was talking, Eleanor, and it's all about why we're here today, purpose anchored. I think in this world, people have choices. They're making choices. We're seeing that where they live, where they work, call it the great resignation, the great reshuffle. There's a lot of re's for what's happening around the world today. But if you look at the common themes of why people are making the choices they are, it's back to what Glenn and Mark talked about at the top of this call. They want to know that they're spending the bulk of their day working on something that matters, and that someone has great intentions for the business that they're in, for the community, for the people involved, et cetera. So some of the optimal cultures today, and I would put Stanley Black Decker's up there as well, are purpose anchored. For us, it's for those who make the world, being a force for good in the world.
Well, just a reflection, and then I'll call in our board chair, Gavin Watson, who had his digital hand up a minute ago, but it just strikes me that the connection seems so clear then between inviting people to bring their whole selves at work, because if they didn't, you wouldn't be getting the benefit of that curiosity and creativity and trust and, all those. I'm just thinking of how those byproducts of the culture that you're describing would support, exactly the kind of coolness in product development and being right there as far as being able to see what's next together as a team. I mean, you wouldn't be able to do that with a more hierarchical, inequitable kind of culture. So
well said.
Thanks. Go ahead, Gavin.
Yeah, you guys have said so many excellent things. It's been really good. I've all done as the questions I could ask, but one thing I'm always interested in is autonomy, creating as much autonomy as possible in the workplace. And there were two things that you guys mentioned that I thought sounded, that I would just sort of like to explore some more. So you said the employee resource groups, you said there were like 90 of them. And so a little bit more maybe about what those are and what people are doing in them and that sort of thing. And then the other thing that sort of jumped out at me was, because I'd never heard of it before, but the augmented intelligence, I thought that was great. It sounded like what Mark was saying was juxtaposing was maybe artificial intelligence, which would be more like telling people what to do. And instead of doing that, you were instead giving people the information so that they could figure out what needed to be done. I'm guessing, but anyway, so.
I'll start with the employee resource groups, Mark, and then you can take the tech question if that works for you. Thank you, Gavin, for the question. The beauty of the autonomy of the ERGs at Stanley Black Decker is they all do different things. Our goal for them is connection within the organization, over 50,000 people across the globe, and also inherent in that advocacy and allyship for these affinity groups. But I'll give you an example. I'm a sponsor of the African Ancestry Network in Connecticut. It's a chapter. So some of the things we do is engage in the community. So we're doing collecting school supplies for the local Boys and Girls Club. We put on virtual summer programming for those scholars who want to get ahead of the next academic season or learn more about careers. We offer workshops, how to write your resume, tips on studying, offer some mentorship to young people in our community. It's very, very much external facing, but even internal facing, we offer expert speakers, subject matter experts to come and address our own employees about you name it, career advancement, mental health care. When COVID hit, we had medical speakers come and talk to different populations. People of color were hesitant about the vaccine, so we catered to that. And then we had conversations about, pregnant women had concerns, we catered to that. So we serve our own employees as well, but largely organized to provide an imprint and a footprint in our community. And so that there's an organization called A Better Chance that I'm a member of the board. They offer advanced scholarship opportunities and academic opportunities to young people of color. They're headquartered in New York. Our ERG works very closely with them to interview scholars, to prepare them for where they're going to go to boarding school or a day school. We've hosted their CEO at one of our facilities in Hartford to try to generate interest and awareness and excitement and fundraising for that organization in Connecticut, because that's where the world headquarters were. So that just gives you a view of some of the tentacles that you can have. But again, all the groups are different. So Women's Network is doing some things specific for women that they would do. Mark, again, I mentioned, is connected to veterans and the Abilities Network. So he can mention some of the things we're doing, but it allows the groups to take ownership of how to serve their community, both inside the company and outside the company in a productive way, and gives folks creativity to do that as well. So there's a connection element pre-pandemic where we would gather and network and have social events. We put on a jazz event just for folks to get to know each other, but a lot has been converted to virtual post-pandemic. So Mark, please add about what Veterans Network and Abilities are doing and others. But I hope, Gavin, that was a little bit insightful to some of the things folks are doing.
Allison did a great job. I just add, because working as an executive sponsor for two groups, I have the privilege of kind of being, in the kitchen, watching things develop. And we have this model of the 4 C's of ERGs, right? So, we want each of the ERGs to have an influence on the culture, on the careers of people, on communities, and then on commerce. Now, not all ERGs meet all these things. It's kind of like, a pie in the sky, and the perfectly running ERG would do all that stuff. But the reality is, some of them do really, really good on culture. Others do really phenomenally on career. Some of them have really connected into the commercial area, and others are really engaged in the community. And a typical ERG will have activities in all of those, some level of activity. I'm really disappointed Allison didn't mention that I got to play in an all-black jazz band during Black History Week. But apart from that, so seriously, it is, ERGs. I mean, I've been to a Drishti festival, never went to one, right? Got to play, as I mentioned, with all jazz, actually twice with 2 different all African jazz bands. Got to experience, I don't know how many different kinds of food, right? Raise the flag of LGBT. We're going to be raising the flag again, just a few days down in Baltimore and in our various locations. So this, as Allison was saying, enriches us, right? You learn from the experts, you learn from your employees who have got, and it also, we know, interestingly, Gallup does a study of organizational wellness, and they've got the most hated question on the Gallup poll is, do you have a best friend at work? I have one, Allison Lawrence, but and she's got one too. She knows in me, but she's got a lot more friends at work, right? Because everybody loves Allison, and that turns out to be really important, because if Allison's really pissed off about something, she's going to tell me. She's going to say, I just had this meeting. Why are we doing this dumb thing over here? And then next time she's in a meeting with me and the topic comes up, I say, what are we doing about X? So, because maybe she feels like she's alone. She's the only one who's raised that issue. So that turns out to be, that culture of safety is important. Quick comment on augmented intelligence. I could talk about that for hours, and I will not. It's a great topic. I'll simply say that we augment intelligence in our factories, both directly by giving people cooperative robots, or giving them data analytics so they can see predictively what their functions are, make them smarter in what they do. We do it in our processes. We have a chief AI officer, which I was very, very fortunate to help in the recruiting of. Good friend of mine, Mukesh Dalal, who is the former Bose chief AI officer, and works across, making our businesses like, how should you price something, or what's going to happen to commodities, or are we going to are experiencing unusual attrition in HR? He can do data analytics and a whole bunch of different things to make all of us better. And we use digital dashboards for COVID tracking, for all kinds of stuff. And then finally, in our products, we have products like the Foresight product, which uses AI, privacy preserving, looks at the outline of typically elderly people, and does gait analysis and can predict 30 to 40 days ahead of time when somebody's going to fall, which is typically a catastrophic event, and it costs well above $70,000 in terms of recovery and the like, if there's recovery. So there are lots of examples we could give in construction tech for predictive analytics and of attachments and so on. The company is really committed to augmenting, like we were this morning at the plant, right? Watching the results of the last 2-month development by the line folks. So it's not just empowering and augmenting them, but it's also putting the ability to augment themselves in their hands. That's really the cutting edge, democratizing, making citizen empowerment so that they can actually build a better future, not just us. I mean, why should it be people sitting in a tower, thinking about the future? Give the people the power.
I'm wondering if in the hiring process, you have to have people kind of like buy into this whole big picture, or do they find they're, like if somebody's really into one aspect of ESG, can you kind of bring them along from a holistic viewpoint? If somebody's like a real geek about electrification, for instance, do you find that that's kind of their entry point, and then it swings around to include everything else, or do they have to kind of be well-rounded when they come through the door?
Allison, you should talk about that as a business leader.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. My personal experience, Eleanor and team, is that folks have been pretty well-rounded. Where they've had gaps is their education in one of them. So maybe they're passionate about E, but they really want to learn how they can make an impact in S and G, or they're passionate about S and they get to Stanley Black Decker and they hear all about the things we're doing from an environmental standpoint, and so they want to learn and grow. I personally haven't run into a lot of issues where anyone, was so kind of focused on one pillar that they forsake the rest. But I think that's one of the things we're trying to help with, right? Is really moving education forward on ESG, really providing individual ownership on all the tenants. As a business leader, I am literally tasked to drive sustainability measures through my products, through my packaging, through my processes, and as I mentioned earlier, now tied to metrics and eventually tied to compensation. So I better get my head around all the elements. My team better get our head around all the elements, or we will be left behind. And so, we are growing as an organization. I think we are well advanced for a company in our industry. I think investors are recognizing that about us, but we would tell you, we have space to go in all three. We just want to continue to make significant progress year after year as we get better at holistically activating against our ESG goals. Mark, I don't know what you would add to that.
No, I think that's well said. I mean, I think in some cases, you can't expect people to come in to be, if you will, it's a great question, Eleanor, but, fully well-rounded, because the world hasn't been fully well-rounded, right? The world was very, myopic and, make money, right? It wasn't about, is your product circular? Nobody asked that 5 years ago. Or very, very few people asked that. Now, you walk into Home Depot and you can buy biologically based degreaser, right, from DeWalt, right? Completely, biosafe. I handed one of the people in the government's workforce, who we work with a lot, some bar chain oil that smells like olive oil, because it's completely biologically based. And if you think about it, why would you use a chainsaw if you're thinning out your wood so that you can make it grow healthy, and dump petrochemicals. But one of the most polluted areas in someone was telling me yesterday in the world are railway lines. And it turns out we just introduced 6 months ago the first bio-based railway cutter that actually makes the rail when cutting it extends the life of the blade, but it also makes it operate at a lower temperature and more efficiently, faster. So nature evolved to the way it is for a reason, right? And woe to us that aren't bio-inspired. So now, do we expect everybody who walks through the door to be a bio-inspirational? No, right? But we do expect them, as Allison noted, to grow, right? So we will show you the way to go. But there's no question there's a bias in our selection process. We're looking for people who have a growth mindset, who are open, who care about those who make the world, who are focused on the future, and want to be a better version of themselves in the process.
Thanks, Mark and Allison, for unpacking what has been an incredible journey for you both and everyone else at Stanley Black Decker. And I hadn't seen Mark in a while, and now I know what you've been up to, Mark. It's a very impressive and deep and broad programs that you're running, and I think it's particularly profound for an organization like male-dominated industry like that to be aggressively leaning into recruiting women and training people of color and minorities, and really broaden their workforce. And what I love about the projects is that you've had data to back it up as well. So it's not only the right thing to do, but it's showing very positive ROI. And we've really enjoyed the last hour and learning your what that journey looks like on a global scale. And I'm very thankful for your time to invest in our community and share so many like-minded ideas around what good business looks like. And my stories today, they're profound, and we will share them widely within our community. And keep up the great work. We're so pleased to have you today. And thank you everyone that joined us today. I hope we found it useful, and I hope you'll spread the good word.